If it's Monday, gun violence in America. Another deadly mass shooting, this one in an Indiana mall. On the same day, a Texas State Investigative Committee releases a scathing new report into the Uvalde shooting police response. We'll speak to the chairman of that committee in just a moment. Plus, what's next for the president's agenda? U.S. climate initiatives hang in the balance as Democrats blast Senator Manchin for dealing another blow to the White House's plans. I'll speak with Democratic Senator Ed Markey, longtime supporter of climate legislation and the original Green New Deal co-sponsor. That's ahead. And later, could it be the final January 6th hearing? Committee members prepare to unveil new evidence this week as they focus on what former President Trump did and did not do amid the insurrection. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. In just hours, the Uvalde City School Board will hold what will likely be an emotional and heated public meeting. It comes just a day after a House committee released a scathing report on the police's response to May's shooting at Robb Elementary School, calling the tragedy that left 19 children and 2 teachers dead the result of systemic failures. The committee, however, found no one other than the gunman himself to be to blame for the shooting. According to its report, despite a robust police response, the committee found a breakdown in the chain of command, along with egregiously poor decision-making. In the midst of the shooting, no one called the Robb Elementary's principal to ask about the location of a master key for the school. And the school district's police chief testified that he immediately began to think of the attacker as being cornered and the situation as being one of a barricaded subject. The police chief told the committee he would have acted differently had he known injured victims were in the classrooms. The chair of the committee that conducted the investigation issued this warning yesterday.
The people of Uvalde before this, they felt it couldn't happen here. They felt that. That's the false sense of security I worry about. I think some of the same systems that we found here that failed that day are across the entire state and country. And I do not want to say because of one thing or one person here, it could not happen elsewhere.
We are going to speak to that person, State Representative Dustin Burrows. In just a few moments, we're going to get new answers about the report. The city of Uvalde has also released body cam video from some of the 376 police officers who responded to the scene that day. The video shows the confusion among them. Despite the heavy police presence, it took more than an hour to take down the gunman. Meanwhile, Uvalde's mayor has announced the city's acting police chief has been placed on leave while the city conducts its own investigation into his department's response. All of this comes as we learn about another mass shooting less than 24 hours ago. 3 people killed, 2 others injured at a mall just outside of Indianapolis. The shooter was taken out by a witness who was armed. It also comes as a jury decides whether the gunman who killed 17 people at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, 4 years ago, remember that one, receives the death penalty or life in prison. For more on all of this, I'm joined by NBC's Priscilla Thompson in Uvalde and NBC's Shaquille Brewster, who has the very latest on Sunday's shooting in Greenwood, Indiana. And Priscilla, we're going to get to you in just a moment. A lot of questions for you there on the ground in Uvalde. But first, I do want to go to Shaq. You have been reporting on this shooting that happened yesterday just outside of Indianapolis. What can you tell us about the investigation? I know you have some new details about the person who took out the gunman.
That's right, Kristen. We learned a lot from authorities in a press conference just a few hours ago, including the exact timeline of what happened nearly 24 hours ago. And they say this started at 4:54 when the suspect walked into the mall. He then immediately went into the bathroom of the food court. And the chief says he stayed in that bathroom for 1 hour and 2 minutes. When he came out, he opened fire. He hit 3 individuals, killing them, and then he shot 2 others, and that was when the so-called Good Samaritan, what police are calling the Good Samaritan, armed civilian, armed with a pistol, engaged the suspect. They said he was from a far distance, but shot him multiple times and and ended the threat and ended that shooting. So we're learning those details. Police also saying that they went through the investigation. They went through looking at surveillance video. They went to the house, the home of the shooter, found his laptop in a heated oven with some gas, found his phone in a toilet. They say that there's no contacts that they've had with him in the past, that when they contacted his family was surprised about the shooting. So a lot of new details that we're finding out. But the key thing that investigators are saying is that this is something that could have been much worse. That suspect, 20 years old, was armed with an AR-15 style weapon, had another one in his book bag in the bathroom, and had more than 100 rounds of ammunition that police say he was ready to use just yesterday evening.
Shaq, those weapons, the subject of so much debate here in Washington. Thank you for that reporting. Priscilla, I do want to turn to you and this nearly 80-page report out of Uvalde, which details the failed law enforcement response. It is just scathing. It's devastating. There was already outrage among the victims' families, and I know you've been talking to folks there on the ground. What has the reaction been?
Well, Kristen, people are angry, and they are continuing to be angry. For weeks, they have been told to wait until this investigation plays out before passing judgment, before blaming anyone. And now the facts have been laid out, and it is just as bad as many people thought that it would be, laying out just failure after failure on the part of law enforcement as it relates to the security protocols at the school and how they were being followed by folks. And so people here are angry, and the conversation now is turning towards accountability and what that is going to look like. You mentioned a school board meeting later on today where undoubtedly this anger is going to be on full display, particularly as it relates to the school police chief, Pete Arredondo, who was initially said to be the incident commander, but who told the Texas Tribune and also said in testimony that he did not believe that he was in charge of the scene. But many people here do feel that he bears responsibility. They have been calling for him to be fired, and now that this information has been released, that is absolutely going to come up at the school board meeting tonight if there is no update from the school district before that, because people are angry and they want to see action and they want to see that accountability and they want to see it now. Kristen?
And Priscilla, you talk about the school board meeting tonight. Based on what I have been reading, it seems as though the families are outraged in part because they don't feel like they're getting the answers they need, even in the wake of the release of this nearly 80-page report. How much are there going to be calls for better communication with the families at this school board meeting tonight?
Well, in my conversations with the families, I have to say many of them say they don't know if they'll ever be able to trust the information that they're being given from officials here. Some of them, even as they were talking about the report, saying they don't know how much of that they can trust. And I think that is just a sign of the misinformation and the sort of conflicting stories that they've been told over the past several weeks. But I think what they are really focused on now is that, okay, we've gotten some of the information. We already feel like we have a sense based on what they have seen on video, and that's the body cam footage and also the surveillance video. And so they really are turning to accountability. And I did speak with the great-grandfather of Lexi Rubio, one of the victims in this shooting, about that accountability and what it should look like and what he would like to see happen. And I want to play a little bit of that conversation.
Not what they should do to them.
Which is
like I
what?
said, in my book, they should fire them and take their pension away and give it to the parents that lost kids and the ones that the kids are traumatized because they were wounded. Okay, that's what I think they should do. Beginning with the superintendent and ending with the school board, starting with the mayor, the city, most of the city council, and the cops.
And so you hear him there saying that everybody needs to go. It's not just the police officers, it's the city council, it's the school board, it's everyone. And so we'll certainly be listening for any additional outrage and reaction from that as people fight for that accountability here, Kristen.
And that is the key word. That's what we're going to be talking about with Representative Burrows as we push forward to this meeting tonight. Thank you, Priscilla, for your great reporting from the ground there. We really appreciate it. And with me now is Texas State Representative Dustin Burrows. He's the chair of the Texas House Committee that investigated the Uvalde shooting. Representative Burrows, thank you so much for joining me. This is an extensive report. It's nearly 80 pages. And I wonder, big picture, what surprised you most in these findings? What horrified you most?
You know, I think the thing that surprised me the most was the morning of the shooting, the people of Uvalde had a false sense of security. They believed they had system in place at the school level to have doors locked, to have a fence around it, to even monitor social media. And they believed they had law enforcement that was trained and ready to actually do what needed to be done. And we found out, of course, that was mistaken. And what you realize is, I think that same false sense of security probably exists throughout many different school districts and communities across this state and country.
And that's big picture. Let's drill down on some of the details and the specifics now, Representative. I'm curious, when did police, based on your investigation, first learn about those 911 calls that were coming in from the classroom?
So we have almost 380 different law enforcement responders on scene. It is unclear which officers knew what and when. We know some of the officers inside the building, which is a much smaller number than that 380, would have been aware of that, but probably not all of them because of the difficulty with radio communications.
And when do you think they would have become aware? Because it took nearly an hour for them to actually respond and go into the classroom. Were they aware prior to that? Because it's our understanding that the surveillance video suggests that they were aware well before they actually breached the classroom.
Well, Chris, let me put it this way. The standard that and the expectations we have of our law enforcement is if you know there's victims in that classroom that are dying, you have to go in. There was enough information on the ground early on to know there was likely victims in that classroom who needed medical attention. Just the fact that it was a school day and there was shooting and there was class in session is probably enough to come to that reasonable conclusion.
Just to put a fine point on it, though, do you have a sense from a timing perspective about when those, you said it wasn't all of the officers, but some of the officers you said were likely aware that those 911 calls were coming in. When do you think they first became aware?
So we know we've got some information about that. We also know there's an officer, Ruiz, who got a phone call from his wife that she was shot and dying, and some of the people on the north side of the door got that information early on. And then in the report, we actually timestamped a quote from Chief Arredondo where we believe he admits that there was knowledge at that time when there was he had knowledge there was children and victims inside the room.
All right, here's part of your report that I just want to ask you about. Other than the attacker,
yes,
the report says the committee did not find any villains in the course of its investigation. There's no one to whom we can attribute malice or ill motives, the report says. Instead, we found systemic failures and egregiously poor decision-making. We recognize that the impact of this tragedy is felt most profoundly by the people of Uvalde in ways we cannot fully comprehend. And I understand you're saying that there's no one villain, but what do you think should happen to the officers, to the law enforcement who were a part of that failed response? Should they be held accountable?
So I think it goes back to my previous statement. We have standards. We have expectations. Clearly, if an officer knows or should have known there were people dying in that room, they have failed to achieve those expectations and standards, and I believe there will be accountability. Now, that accountability is going to come from people at the different agencies, local levels, those in power to actually do that. And, you know, because that's not contained in this report, I would hate to speculate as to the different options that are available to that. But I do agree with the community. There needs to be accountability.
And I understand what you're saying, that this might not be a uniform response. You just heard the grandfather there of one of the victims saying that these officers should be fired. They should lose their pension. Do you think that those types of punishments would be fair? and appropriate in this instance?
You know, I know since our report has come out, there's, I think, more investigations underway. Looks like the Uvalde mayor is starting one and has put someone on suspension. And obviously, you know, those are elected positions to be responsive to the people of Uvalde. And I trust that they're going to make good decisions and, you know, figure out how to give responsibility as it's deemed.
Let me ask you, because your report really focused on the response and not the root causes of the shooting itself. Should you have delved more into what actually was driving this gunman, what caused this? Why not include that in this investigation?
Well, we go to great extents talking about the attacker, and we, of course, we do not use his name in the report or his image because that's the notoriety that he wanted, and he does not deserve that. We also don't believe that we want others to look at him as some sort of hero figure and try to, you know, emulate him. But if you look through that, we do an extensive analysis about where he's been, that he achieved the name school shooter and kind of his background. And perhaps from that, you can drive some of the motivations as to what it was. We know now that he returned to his fourth grade classroom. We may never know exactly what the significance of that fourth grade classroom was, but we put in our report some of those details for people to continue to examine and have some information about that.
And Representative, I talked to you about the grandfather of one of the victims who spoke to our Priscilla Thompson. Let me read you a little bit more of what he had to say. He said, "There's no truth. We ain't going to get the truth. We won't get it today. We won't get it tomorrow. We won't get it next week or maybe a year from now. We're not going to get the truth." What is your reaction to him? He clearly has a loss of faith, not only in law enforcement, but frankly, in everyone in leadership.
No, we talked about that. And I think when, you know, misinformation starts, there's a lot of trust in the community that's lost. And we felt that as we talked to people in the community and victims, you could just have this sense that they don't know what to trust. I will tell you that this was a bipartisan committee. We did, you know, worked in earnest to make sure everything that we put in this report that we would say we could stand by and tell everybody it's not speculation. There's actual accountability in here, and the people of Uvalde obviously are affected the most, and clearly there's a loss of trust.
Well, we know that there is so much emotion around the findings in this incredibly scathing report. We really appreciate your coming on to help us understand it further. Texas State Representative Dustin Burrows, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, Democrats unload on Senator Joe Manchin. Senator Bernie Sanders blasts the West Virginia centrist, accusing him of deliberately sabotaging the president's agenda. I'll talk to Senator Ed Markey, a key Democrat working to pass a climate change agenda that now could be DOA. That's next. And later, what to expect in this Thursday's primetime January 6th hearing as the committee prepares to view new evidence tomorrow of what could be the committee's final public hearing. You're watching Meet the Press Now. We're back after a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Democrats are venting their anger over what they see as Senator Joe Manchin's reversal of support for major climate and tax provisions in their reconciliation bill. In an interview with ABC yesterday, Senator Bernie Sanders accused Senator Manchin of acting in bad faith.
He didn't abruptly do anything.
He was negotiating for a while.
The president's agenda. No. Look, if you check the record 6 months ago, I made it clear that you have people like Manchin, Sinema to a lesser degree, who are intentionally sabotaging the president's agenda, what the American people want, what a majority of us in the Democratic caucus want. Nothing new about this. And the problem was that we continue to talk to Manchin like he was serious. He was not.
For his part, President Biden said he'll take executive action on climate if the Senate won't act, but also urged senators to pass parts of the bill that would lower drug prices and prevent insurance premium hikes, provisions Manchin said he could support. Joining me now to discuss this a little bit further from the White House is my colleague, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. So, Mike, I know you've been talking to your sources there. The White House is choosing its words very carefully because they still need Manchin if they're going to get something done on prescription drug prices, right? Talk to me about the thinking right now and the strategy inside the White House.
Yeah, that's right, Kristen. This is a White House that has always had to walk on a tightrope with anything revolving around its legislative agenda for fear of either spurning the left or the center left of its party. And as it relates to Joe Manchin, though, you had last year from the White House, from other Democrats, a lot of cautious optimism that they would eventually get there on a deal. Of course, we remember just before the holidays when Senator Manchin went on Fox News and torpedoed then the larger reconciliation effort, Build Back Better as it was called. When we're talking about the more recent negotiations between simply Senator Manchin and Senator Schumer, the majority leader in the Senate, there had been much more of a resigned skepticism on the part of not just officials here in the White House, but Senate Democrats more broadly. Dick Durbin, the number 2 Senate Democrat, just said a few weeks ago that he really loved Senator Schumer's optimism, but he didn't think they would get there. And sure enough, on Friday, of course, the White House having to pull the plug and call on Senate Democrats to move ahead with whatever deal Manchin is willing to agree to at this point. President Biden himself was rather blunt when asked if he thought Senator Manchin had negotiated in good faith. You heard him say it Friday that he hadn't even been talking to Senator Manchin, so he couldn't speak to it. I think this was largely a Schumer-Manchin effort. Lucy in the football was an analogy I heard a lot in the White House and among Democrats, but so that was not a surprise, but still a disappointment, Kristen.
Yeah, I think everyone's using that Lucy in the football analogy. Mike Memoli, thank you so much for your great reporting. As always, joining me now to discuss this Democratic senator from Massachusetts, Ed Markey. Senator Markey, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
I want to start off by playing what Senator Manchin, a defensive Senator Manchin, told reporters this afternoon and get your reaction. Take a listen.
Real quick, just basically all I have to say. I haven't walked away from anything, and inflation is my greatest concern.
I haven't walked away from anything, Senator Manchin has said. Do you think that he's negotiating in good faith, that he's been negotiating in good faith?
Look, from my perspective, this whole process has been very frustrating. But we now have to take this situation as it is. And that means move quickly to pass prescription drug pricing protection for millions of Americans, to ensure that the Affordable Care Act subsidies are there for millions of Americans before they expire in the next couple of months. And we can get that done. We can get that done with 50 votes in this reconciliation and put it on the president's desk. And then we can move on to the next reconciliation, because we actually have another opportunity to pass this legislation with only 50 votes, including Senator Manchin, and to have Kamala Harris break the tie and send it to the president's desk. And in that bill, we could work on the climate issues. Hopefully, inflation is going to come down. Indications are very strong that gasoline prices have collapsed and they're continuing to collapse. If that's the case, it will be reflected in the inflation number next month and the month after that. If that's the case, we have an opportunity to go back to the table in a new reconciliation and to cut a deal on the climate solutions that just fell off the table in the last week.
And I'm going to ask you about both the climate and the prescription drug pieces of this. But I do want to just go back to you and get you to weigh in. Senator Sanders says that Joe Manchin tried to sabotage the president's agenda. Do you agree?
Look, I share his frustration. I clearly have spent my entire career working on climate issues. I continue to be passionate about working to find a solution right now. And ultimately, the only way to get there is with the next reconciliation package, which we can do in the next couple of months, by the way, reflecting a decline in the inflation rate. And so I just think we have to take Senator Manchin at his word. He says it's not off the table. If that's the case, we actually have a procedure that can be used to pass the wind, the solar, the all-electric vehicle, the battery storage technology subsidies that were in the package and just fell off last week.
Right. I mean, he's basically saying, based on everything that I have read and all of his statements, let's just take a beat and wait for inflation to come down a notch before we pass something that includes climate and tax provisions. But I guess what I hear you saying, Some Democrats think climate and tax provisions are dead. Do you think they're on life support? Can they be revived?
Yeah, they are dead for this reconciliation package, which is why we have to do prescription drugs. We have to do the subsidies for health care for those who will otherwise lose their coverage. We have to do that now. But the climate and energy package is not dead if you take the next reconciliation package, which we can do over the next couple of months. And once again, just with
Senator,
one additional vote from Senator Manchin.
Let me ask.
Yeah, please.
Let me ask you broadly, and I apologize, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but broadly speaking, can Democrats afford this division heading into the midterms? How critical is it that you get on the same page and pass at least something if Democrats are to win some of those close races around the margins?
No, I agree. We have to pass prescription drugs. We have to pass the health care subsidies. We have to get that done. But we shouldn't walk away from climate. We want the White House, and they're saying they're going to do that, to use executive action to deal with the climate crisis, to use potentially the Defense Production Act, stopping any additional drilling on public lands in our country. I would actually declare a climate emergency, but to also not give up on the congressional process, because this other reconciliation bill still sits there as a vehicle that, with a Democrat-only solution, we could put it on the president's desk. So I'm not giving up. I've been disappointed in the past. I've worked on this for decades. I still see a route, and I think we have to be focused upon that to try our best to, before the end of this year, get that climate and energy package also on President Biden's desk.
One of the sticking points, as you know, for Senator Manchin is that he has called for eliminating fossil fuels crazy. Do you think there's a way to get on the same page? Do you think there's an effective climate policy that doesn't move toward banning fossil fuels?
Well, what we want is a level playing field. For 100 years, there have been oil and gas and coal subsidies. All we're looking for here is a level playing field, where wind and solar, all electric vehicles, battery storage technologies, transmission systems are given the tax incentives to be able to compete in the real market. And when that happens, we're very confident that we're going to see a very rapid transition to clean energy technologies in our country. That's really all we're looking for here. And if we get that, we can just step back and allow for the free market to make its own mind up. But I think consumers, utilities, auto industry, they're all ready to make this transition. We just have to put the incentives on the books that oil, gas, and coal have had for 100 years.
All right. Well, we will continue to watch it very closely. Senator Ed Markey, thank you so much for joining us to share your perspective. Really appreciate it. Coming up next, members of the January 6th committee preview what could be their final hearing later this week as members weigh a criminal referral against former President Trump. That reporting live from Capitol Hill next. Welcome back. Jury selection in the trial of former President Trump ally Steve Bannon got underway this morning. He is facing criminal charges of contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with a subpoena to appear in front of the January 6th committee. That committee is scheduled to hold their last hearing for now in prime time Thursday night. It comes as the committee is set to receive new evidence, texts from Secret Service agents before and during January that were previously erased by the agency. The committee's chairman, Benny Thompson, told NBC News on Friday it was weighing a decision to pursue testimony from Vice President Pence as well. NBC's Vitali has been following all of the back and forth over all of this and has the very latest from Capitol Hill. So, Ali, let's start with the latest on those missing Secret Service text messages. Secret Service says, look, they were just clearing out their email. They weren't doing anything that was awry. The committee has subpoenaed the missing text messages, though. So what's the very latest here? What are you expecting?
Yeah, the committee has subpoenaed these missing text messages, and when they left town last week, what multiple committee members told me is they're hoping that they can resurrect this data, even if it's lost, at least in the present. They're hoping now that they can get it by tomorrow, and if you listen to committee members over the weekend on the Sunday shows, they seem pretty confident that they're going to get it by tomorrow. What it means is we could end up seeing these text messages as some of the material that we ultimately see Thursday night in prime time, but we also know why the committee wants to get their hands on this so badly, and it's because there have been major allegations during these hearings from people like Cassidy Hutchinson and others about things that allegedly happened with the former president. For example, when he was in his SUV going from his speech at the Ellipse and wanting to go to the Capitol, Trump was being told no, but according to Cassidy Hutchinson, she was told that he did things like lunge at the steering wheel and even lunge at his Secret Service officer. You got to imagine that if that happened, it would probably show up in text messages from the Secret Service. It makes sense then as to why the committee wants these so badly, and also why it's so suspect that there would be this data overturn during that period of time. Because people like you and me, we flip our phones over, we back it all up to the cloud. That's something that Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren over the weekend said she could not believe didn't happen here, but nevertheless, they seem confident they could get this data.
And Ali, just very quickly, what are you going to be watching for on Thursday night? What are you expecting?
Look, this is, I think, going to be one of the most powerful and intense hearings so far because it's going to focus on the 187 minutes that the Capitol was under attack. The thing that I'm expecting is a huge juxtaposition, a major contrast between the violence and chaos that was happening here on the Hill and the inaction from within the White House. Congressman Adam Kinzinger, one of the people who's leading that hearing, basically said on the Sunday shows that all that the former president did during those roughly 3 hours was gleefully watch it unfold on television. It promises to be pretty damning, Kristen, based on the things that we've heard from the committee so far.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and you have been all over this in your reporting. Ali Vitali, great to see you as always. Thank you so much. And we do have one more bit of news before we go to break. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the face of the federal government's coronavirus response, says he will likely hang up his stethoscope by the end of President Biden's current term. Fauci told NBC News he has not yet made a decision on exactly when, but that he does plan on stepping down as the president's chief medical advisor and head of the NIH's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases by January of 2025. Fauci is 81 years old and has served in his role at the NIH since the Reagan administration. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Turning to the midterm elections, we've got another developing Pence versus Trump proxy war in a Republican gubernatorial primary, this time Arizona. This morning, the former vice president gave his support to Karen Taylor Robson, calling her the only candidate in the field that would promote conservative values. Well, former President Trump has already backed the race's frontrunner, Kari Lake, a former local news anchor who centered her campaign on false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. Both Trump and Pence will be in Arizona this Friday, big face-off, appearing at events with their endorsed candidates, as was the case in the Georgia gubernatorial primary. The candidate Pence is backing also has the support of the state's incumbent Republican governor, Doug Ducey, who, like Georgia's Brian Kemp, stood up to Trump's efforts to overturn the election in 2020. Well, joining me now to discuss all of this is Politico congressional reporter Nicholas Wu, Democratic pollster and MSNBC political analyst Cornell Belcher, and Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain. Thanks to all of you for being here. Really appreciate it. Nicholas, let me start with you. This is another Trump versus Pence fight in Georgia. You have Brian Kemp holding on in Georgia in May, of course, but he had the advantage of incumbency. Things are a little bit different in Arizona, where we're looking at Kari Lake, who's actually up in the polls on Karen Taylor Robson. So what's your read on this race?
Well, what we're seeing here is two candidates that are trying to chart, significantly different pathways within the Republican Party. And in some ways, it ends up being a proxy war between, forces aligned with the former president and those that would seek to find a different path. Pence has, also seems to signal that he's interested in running for higher office again. And so in many ways, this does pit him against his former boss. Yes.
Well, Sarah, pick up on that point. I mean, is Pence looking, even though his chosen candidate in this race is trailing, but is he looking potentially stronger than you may have anticipated a couple of months ago? How would you assess his standing in the GOP right now?
Well, I think that Georgia was a great victory for Pence, but as you articulated, Kemp was already way up. The only thing that the Arizona governor's race is benefiting is actually the Democrats, because you're going to have Republicans voting on both sides, and that's going to be a huge problem, I think, come the general.
Well, Cornell, what do you think about that? And weigh in on the Trump factor as well, because how would you assess Trump's strength at this point? I mean, he's had a very mixed record when it comes to these endorsements.
Yeah, and I think, look, I think endorsements don't mean what they used to once upon a time, and he has had a very mixed record. But overall, I think, especially in certain parts of in deeply red states, I think you'd rather have Trump's endorsement than not have Trump's endorsement, because the base of the Republican Party, so much of the base of the Republican Party is still very loyal to him. But to the point that was just made here earlier, I think when you look at what Trump's doing, especially not only in the governor's races, but also in some of these Senate races, Mitch McConnell doesn't want Trump meddling around in these races either, because sometimes the candidate that Trump endorses is in fact the most extreme candidate, and the only loyalty that candidate needs to show is that they will push and push and push the big lie. So it's not necessarily the mainstream conservative candidate, but a candidate who, frankly, is more loyal to Donald Trump than the Republican Party. And I think that's problematic for Republicans in the fall.
Let's talk about the Democrats now, Cornell. Maryland, of course, holds its primaries tomorrow, and their gubernatorial race is yet another one where Democrats are meddling in the GOP primary. I want to play you an ad. This is from the DGA, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
Meet Dan Cox, Donald Trump's hand-picked candidate for Maryland governor. Cox worked with Trump, trying to prove the last election was a fraud. 100% pro-life. He's fighting to end abortion in Maryland. And Cox will protect the Second Amendment at all costs.
Democrats obviously see this as a potential pickup opportunity, but that is really dicey, because the ad is saying a couple of things about Cox that could be seen as endearing to GOP voters. What do you make of that strategy, Cornell?
Well, I think we do it on both sides. I think if you look at the governor's race in Illinois, a couple of weeks back as well, you had progressive money trying to pick what they thought was the weakest candidate. I think it's kind of dangerous. I'd rather have Democrat money being spent on sort of supporting Democratic ideals. Yeah, selling Democratic ideals. But as a political strategist, I do get it. If you're looking at polls and you see head to head that this candidate is the weaker candidate, and especially in a state like Maryland, we've just had a Republican governor in Maryland, but he's by no means sort of a Trump Republican, right? He's a rather moderate Republican for a blue state. And if you get a really sort of Trump-like Republican in Maryland, it is going to be an uphill battle. I mean, because it's not a deeply red state. It is a fairly blue-leaning state.
Well, and Nicholas, pick up on that point. I mean, are Democrats to some extent playing with fire by elevating some of these candidates who, would be characterized as far-right Republicans in some of these primaries?
There's certainly some concern there, but I mean, to Cornell's point, right? Like, Maryland is still very much a blue state. Democrats have a built-in advantage there in a lot of ways, and so highlighting the fact that you might have a more extreme candidate certainly might play better with that base. Now, the danger is if you elevate a more extreme candidate in a more purple state. There was certainly some hand-wringing among Democrats when Doug Mastriano was nominated as Republicans' gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania. Someone who also embraces many of these election conspiracy theories. But, it's a purpler state, and there's, Democrats have certainly heard a story before about an extreme candidate who they might have cheered for at one point to be the nominee and still ends up winning the general anyway. You can only look to the 2016 election for that.
Yeah, Sarah, I mean, Maryland is obviously a blue state, but to this strategy more broadly, are Republicans standing back and saying, hey, wait a minute, this actually benefits us in the long run?
It benefits us a little bit, but I would say it actually benefits in Maryland, because it's state by state. It actually benefits the Democrats, because if Dan Cox does come through and win, they probably can take a pass on spending money in the general election there, and then they pick up a governor's seat. Where Kelly is much more in line with the current governor, with Governor Hogan, and I think she'd be very difficult to beat in November. So this is a financial play for them, and actually, if I was a Democrat, I'd say it's not a bad play in this state. It is state by state, as we said earlier.
Well, it sure is. I have to ask you about one of the most fascinating states, which is Wyoming. And of course, that's where Congresswoman Liz Cheney is running for re-election. And new polling shows she's down by more than 20 points, even though she's outraising, she's outspending her challenger, Harriet Hageman. Sarah, it looks like Cheney is poised to lose this. You never know what's going to happen. Cheney is undeterred. She's moving forward, obviously, with her work with the January 6th committee. And there's a lot of buzz that she could be a potential contender in 2024. What do you think this looks like about 5 years from now?
I think she made the calculated risk that January 6th and being on the committee was more important than her reelect. And I think you're going to probably end up seeing her lose. Though I will say she's not a member of Main Street, so I don't have any real good inside information. Though I do think she is Dick Cheney's daughter. I would never count her out. And I think there is a strong possibility she will end up running for president. Whether she'll be successful or not, only time will tell. But she has made this calculated risk to do what she feels is best for this country.
Yeah, it's really one of the more fascinating races to watch, particularly when you go into Wyoming. The reporters talking to Democrats who are elevating her. Cornell, let's talk about fundraising writ large. Our NBC News political unit crunched some numbers and basically found that Democratic incumbents in close races have a big advantage when it comes to campaign cash. Now, obviously, it's better for a candidate to have more money than less money. However, I guess the question is, how much of a difference does cash make in a potential wave cycle like this?
Well, I'm going to be the bad Washington political consultant and weigh in on money here. And I bet my Republican colleague will also give a nod to this. Look, for better or worse, you need a lot of money to run campaigns these days. You do. And I could make the case that it is absurd that a congressional race will cost you $2 million, but a congressional race will cost you $2 million these days. But it is look, there's midterms is supposed to be historically turned against Democrats this cycle. I think that for Democrats to have some success, they need to change the historical dynamic. Having money advantage is one way to change that dynamic. If you can, in fact, out-communicate your opponent and drive your message more than your opponent, it's helpful. We're also seeing this in some congressional races, some targeted congressional races also, where Republicans have had a bruising primary, much more bruising primary, and Democrats have cash-on-hand advantage. They will need that cash-on-hand advantage going up against history in this midterm.
Oh, they are certainly going up against some very stiff headwinds. That is for sure. Great conversation, Nicholas, Cornell, and Sarah. Great to see all of you. Thanks so much. And still ahead, Congress, climate, and a brutal heat wave. President Biden vows executive action on climate change as millions of Americans experience life-threatening temperatures. But what realistically can the president do to fight climate change without the help of Congress? That's next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The United Kingdom is facing a potentially record-breaking heat wave this week, as some areas are forecasted to reach up to 106 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat prompted the UK's weather service to issue its first ever red warning, urging people not to exercise, travel, or even go outside. But inside may not be much better, as most houses don't have air conditioning. The high heat serves as yet another reminder of the current impact of climate change, as Senator Joe Manchin derailed negotiations on climate legislation in the U.S. this weekend. In response, President Biden promised, quote, strong executive action to meet this moment if Congress fails to act. And joining me now to discuss all of this and what climate action could be within the White House's power, I'm joined by energy and environmental law lawyer Michael Gerrard. He's the director of the Columbia University Center for Climate Change Law. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Let me dive into these questions, and hopefully you can hear me. You have a long list of things that President Biden can do unilaterally on his own. Among them, some of these he's already working for: stronger fuel economy standards for cars and trucks, control methane leakage, oil and gas operations, lease more federal lands and waters for wind and solar. And the list goes on and on. What are the top priorities that you think President Biden can tackle through executive action?
I think the top priorities are stronger emission controls on motor vehicles, moving in the direction of electric vehicles, doing everything possible to move toward more solar and wind. We ultimately need to transition most of the electricity system to renewables. Controlling methane and hydrofluorocarbons, which are two of the most powerful greenhouse gases. So those are some of the things that the EPA and the Department of Energy and the Department of the Interior can all do without further action by Congress.
And can you put this into context for people? Because when you think about executive action, when I have covered executive actions historically, they just don't have as much teeth. They don't carry as much weight as new legislation. And that's obvious. But when it comes to some of these things that you're calling for, is there a difference? In other words, do some of those actions actually carry some weight? Could they make a real difference?
They make a real difference. Congress has already, sometimes recently, sometimes years ago, given the authority needed to do those. And so those can really make a colossal difference, as prior actions by EPA have over the years led to much cleaner air, much cleaner water. Those laws really work.
And I guess the other question, the EPA is a significant piece of this as well, a significant agency. How important is it that the president has buy-in from the EPA? Obviously, there have been some setbacks recently in the Supreme Court and Department of Energy.
Yeah, the setbacks from the Supreme Court have not been as bad as they may have looked. The Supreme Court said that one particular activity of the EPA wouldn't work, but almost everything was left aside. So the central work would be done by EPA and the Energy Department of the Interior Department. But obviously they all work for President Biden, and they're on board. They're enthusiastically on board with doing all of this.
And you sound relatively optimistic that some of these actions can get done and will get done, which is a real departure from a lot of people and a lot of policymakers. What gives you optimism that there's going to be some real movement on some of these really important things that you're calling for?
These agencies clearly have the authority and they have the motivation to do it, which is not to say that it's enough. Had we not had the Supreme Court action, and more importantly, had Joe Biden kept in and kept with the deal, we could have done a lot more. So I'm not saying that we're going to do as much as we want to do or need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but there's still quite a bit that can be done.
And I'm sure you've heard a lot of the back and forth because Senator Manchin pulled out of the negotiations and basically said inflation is just too high. Now is not the time to tackle things like a new climate agreement, a new tax agreement. Some people feel as though he's sabotaging the president's agenda. How frustrated are you that the negotiations are now stalled?
Oh, it's unspeakably frustrating. And one of the particular ironies is that a major reason for the inflation is high oil and gas prices. And if we had more energy efficiency and if we were using more electric vehicles and generating more wind and solar, we wouldn't have to buy nearly as much gas and oil and coal, and the inflation wouldn't be nearly as bad. So what Senator Manchin has done is really moving in exactly the wrong direction on inflation, as well as lots of other things.
And very quickly, you've also said that state and local governments need to play a critical role in this as well. What more do you think can be done?
Many of the states are imposing stronger energy efficiency requirements on buildings. They're building up electric vehicle charging infrastructure. They're building out the wind and solar at the massive level that's needed. So quite a few of the states are moving forward and are very enthusiastic and aggressive about doing that.
Well, this is a really complicated and urgent issue, and we appreciate your joining us to give us your insights and analysis. Thank you, Michael Gerrard. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us this hour. I will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.